Hey folks, how's it going? Welcome to the next episode in the Dr. Zhivago Slow Read here on my channel. This will be going out on Substack as an essay at camscampbellreads.substack.com. Also on YouTube and as an audio podcast. There will be a printable version available over at camscampbellreads.substack.com, which you can download and read at your leisure. So I will have removed all of the images, etc., to save ink, and you have a document that you can take elsewhere. Right. Preamble's done. I'm Cams Campbell, your host, and I'd like to welcome you to this one. This one's a wee bit longer than the past few weeks. This one's 37 pages long. And the title of the chapter in the Hayward and Harari translation is Opposite the House of the Caryatids. If you're anything like me, you won't know what a caryatid is. At least I didn't. If you're reading the Pevear and Volokhonsky translation, this chapter's entitled Opposite the House with the Figures. So they've translated caryatids. In Russian, it's protiv doma s figurami, so figures. So Hayward and Harari have chosen caryatids as the correct terminology, which I have looked up and provided an image for you of an architectural building where it says a caryatid is a sculpted female figure serving as an architectural support, such as a pillar or column holding up an entablature on her head. So figures doesn't really quite cover it, because it could be any kind of figures, whereas caryatid is a specific kind of figure. Right, let's dive into the chapter. We're in Yuryatin. The month and year aren't clear, but we know it's spring. The whites have been defeated, so it's probably 1921. There's a proclamation on the wall with instructions on labour books. And there's an image here I've included of a Trudovaya Knizhka, a labour book from 1918. Another proclamation claims that anyone hoarding food will be shot on sight, and a third, that those who do not belong to the exploiting class are admitted to the membership of consumer communes. Carrying arms without a permit is illegal. Well, it kind of is now as well, isn't it? Yury Zhivago arrives in Yuryatin, emaciated, wild-looking, black with dirt, with a birch satchel on a stick over his shoulder. And I found an image of a birch bag, which I've included for you. He's made his way all the way from the partisans' camp by following the railway line and sleeping in abandoned train carriages. On his way, he sees a young man from the partisans' camp jumping out of an abandoned railway carriage and relieving himself in the snow. It's Terenti Galuzin, although Yury won't know him, will he? Oh, he will. He'll know him from the woods. The gunshot had only wounded him, and he'd managed to crawl away and was now making his way back to Holy Cross under a fake name. So you remember Galuzin, it said in the previous chapter, was the last to die after getting shot by firing squad in the woods by the partisans. Yury makes his way up the stairs to Lara's old flat opposite the house of Caryatids. He reaches for the key hidden in the brickwork and finds not only the key, but a letter from Lara. She's heard that Yury is alive and has written to let him know that she and her daughter are going to Varikino. Yury assumes that since Lara is going to Varikino, Tonya must no longer be there. He doesn't notice that the letter continues on the reverse side, so he folds it up and puts it in his pocket. He then goes down to read the notices posted on the village notice board. The notice board contains regulations posted by the new regime on arriving in the village. It's not clear to Yury when these notes were posted. Are they referring to the previous revolution or after the Civil War? Pasternak lays it on pretty thick just how overwhelming and pointless Yury sees all these regulations to be. Pasternak presents the barrage of regulations as almost overwhelming, reflecting Yury's exhaustion and alienation. Upon coming to, he refuses aid from passers-by and makes his way up to Lara's flat. It has become infested with rats while lying empty. He barricades himself in a single room and does what he can to keep the rats out. He feels like he's coming down with an illness, alternating between weakness and uncontrollable restlessness. He feels an urge to shave and get a haircut, but can't find any scissors. Then he remembers the tailor's on Spassky Street and he heads out to borrow some scissors. The tailor's workshop is full of women sewing army clothes. Yury gestures through the window to be let in, but the women think he's mocking them and wave him on. So Yury goes round to the back door. A woman opens the door for him and he asks for scissors to cut his hair. The woman offers to do it for him. Yury accepts and they have a conversation. He explains to the woman, who it turns out has worked as a hairdresser, that he's an inspector for the former Union of Credit Cooperatives and that his train had become stranded. She warns him not to tell anyone about it, but to say he's a doctor or a teacher instead. The woman tells Yury about an ensign whom the Whites ambushed. The ensign's wife is freaking out and goes to General Galyulin, remember him? With some help from the exceptionally kind woman across the road. Lara, thinks Yury. She says things have changed since the Bolsheviks took power. She and her 3 sisters all favoured the Bolsheviks as they were for the common people. Only one of her sisters died. Could these be the Tuntseva sisters? It must be Glasha who's cutting Yury's hair. She explains that her nephew, who is Liberius, though she doesn't name him, is the head of the peasant forces. Once Yury realises who she is, he keeps it to himself, but goes on to ask about Varikino. Who lived there? Was it safe during the upheavals? He learns from Glasha that the family that was there had got away to Moscow and that the doctor, Yury Zhivago, was missing, presumed dead. Returning to Lara's flat, Yury is elated to learn that Tonya, the children and Tonya's father had escaped to Moscow. He has to deal with the rats before he can settle down for the night, and it's already getting dark. He fills the cracks with broken glass and sets to work lighting the Dutch stove. He sees initials stamped into the firewood, which leads him to suppose that Lara must have got them from Sam Debiatov, and he begins to feel jealous. Yury's imagination quickly jumps to how she may have repaid Sam Debiatov, and he doesn't like where those thoughts lead. His thoughts turn to Tonya and he reproaches himself for having forgotten that she was expecting their child. And why did Lara not mention them as having passed through Yuryatin on their way back to Moscow? Why didn't she mention Sam Debiatov? And of course now we're wondering what was on the reverse side of her letter that Yury hasn't read. There's some lyrical waxing about Mother Russia and Lara, something too big and expansive to reproach. He feels the joy of living so that his eyes fill with tears, tears of admiration and repentance. He stokes the stove and enjoys the play of the firelight as he pulls the crumpled letter from his pocket. He notices the writing on the reverse. Tonya had a baby daughter and Lara's going to look for a horse. And on the Dutch stove, I've included an image here that I took from the TV adaptation of The White Guard. You might remember that we read The White Guard here on the channel earlier in the year, and the Dutch stove features in that novel almost as a character. It's quite interesting how it's used. So there's an image there of that from The White Guard with the graffiti written on it, and the stove is open with the main character there stoking it, just as Yury did as he watched the firelight playing on the walls. Sleep finally overtakes him, but it brings 2 disturbing dreams. In the first, his son is behind a glass door, while Yury's on the other side, holding the door shut. He wakes up in a sweat and realises that he's ill. He falls back asleep and dreams of a dark winter morning in Moscow before the revolution. He's in a room that reminds him of a railway carriage with people sleeping and food scraps left lying around on newspaper. Lara is there acting as the hostess. In her book Lara, Anna Pasternak cites this opening paragraph as a mirror image of Boris Pasternak's longing for Olga Ivinskaya, the lover with whom he was having an affair, in the full knowledge of his wife Zinaida, who at one stage was also a lover. And I've got an image here that I took from the book Lara of Olga and Boris in the Little House, summer 1958. So that will have been at Boris's writer's retreat at Peredelkino. And Olga lived across the lake in the Little House, while Boris wrote in the Big House. Yury is delirious and sleeps through his fever. When his fever breaks after many weeks, he awakens in a clean bed. Lara is there and has been looking after him. Yury faints with joy. Yury and Lara's bliss is absolute. Their love is beautifully described in this chapter, and again it is cited in Lara as an example of Pasternak and Olga's love after they are reunited when Olga is released from prison camp after 3.5 years of servitude. Lara tells Yury that he's not well enough to travel to Moscow to be with his family. She mentions the Gajda Rising. This refers to the Czechoslovak Legion under the command of Radula Gajda. I touched upon the Legion in an earlier chapter analysis. Gajda fell out with Kolchak's Whites in July 1919 and was summarily dismissed. He then led an uprising of socialist revolutionaries known as the Gajda Rising, which failed. He then escaped back to Czechoslovakia and turned to fascism. Lara tells Yury to go back to work as a doctor while he's recovering. His background as the son of a Siberian millionaire and his desertion from the partisans make it dangerous for him. It's dangerous for Lara's husband too, Pasha/Strelnikov. He's being hunted because he got too near the top and knows too much. An interesting concept given how much killing he's alleged to have done for the Reds. She tells Yury that she was with Tonya when she had her baby. She says they got on splendidly. Lara tells Yury about the new currency that has been issued, notes with values of 5 and 10 million. I tried to find examples matching Pasternak's description, but have come up short. All I could find at those denominations for that period were these, but they're not the colours of Pasternak's description or of the right shape. Lara explains that she was at Varikino to prepare the house for Yury's return. How she knew he was still alive isn't explained. Perhaps it was simply wishful thinking. She tells Yury that his daughter was named Masha after his mother. Yury asks about Sam Devyatov and Lara understands that he's really asking if she'd had a relationship with him. She hadn't. She explains that Sam Devyatov reminds her of someone else, alluding, of course, to Komarovsky. Quote, "There's something broken in me. There's something broken in my whole life." It's not difficult to sympathise with her. By modern standards, what Komarovsky did amounts to child sexual abuse. OK, Lara was 16, possibly 17 at the time, but she was seduced and taken advantage of. She lives under Komarovsky's shadow. She tries to explain this to Yury. An interesting conversation ensues. Yury tells her that he could only really be jealous of a man he despises and with whom he has nothing in common. Is he saying that he doesn't despise Komarovsky? He explains that if he were to find an artist who does what Yury does, but better, he would feel compelled to defer to his rival and quit. He says to Lara, quote, "I don't think I could love you so much if you had nothing to complain of and nothing to regret. I don't like people who have never fallen or stumbled. Their virtue is lifeless and it isn't of much value. Life hasn't revealed its beauty to them." Most of us carry regrets of one kind or another, which perhaps explains why this passage resonates so strongly. They discuss the first time that Yury saw Komarovsky when he was with Misha Gordon. He tells Lara that Misha had witnessed Yury's father's suicide on the train while he was in the company of his lawyer, Komarovsky. The fact that Komarovsky had such a detrimental influence on both Lara and Yury's lives is probably the biggest coincidence in the book. If I'm honest, it feels contrived, but not impossible. Yury says that Komarovsky is the man, quote, "of whom I shall always be incurably, insanely jealous." Well, good. At least we've established that much. He's jealous of the man that he knows will one day take Lara from him, just as death will someday separate them. Yury asks Lara to tell him about her husband and quotes Shakespeare at her. Pasternak is actually quoting from his own translation of Romeo and Juliet. Lara thinks she saw Pasha from a distance one time, surrounded by guards and getting into a car. She saw his face and saw in it the living embodiment of an ideal. He'd handed himself over to, quote, something lofty but deadening and pitiless, which wouldn't spare him in the end. It's really rather frightening language for the time, and I admire Pasternak's boldness here. Lara tells Yury about her life with Pasha before the revolution. She explains that she'd grown up almost in the same house as Yury, along with Pasha and Galyulin. She knew that Pasha was obsessed with her as a boy. Quote, he and I were as different as you and I are alike. An interesting line. I'm not sure that being alike is a recipe for a good relationship. I love how she goes on to describe how everything has been swept away in the revolution. All that's left is the human spirit, reaching out for other humans. Quote, we live and love and weep and cling to one another. Lara explains that if Strelnikov were to become Pasha again, she would go straight back to him. Quote, there is nothing I wouldn't sacrifice, even you. Then she takes it back and talks of duty over love. She believes that the war is at the root of everything. Lara argues that before the revolution, murder had seemed exceptional, almost something that belonged in plays rather than everyday life. We listened to reason and did what our conscience told us. She goes on to talk more and more seditiously, the kind of talk that could get one sent to the camps. Quote, this social evil became an epidemic. It was catching, and it affected everything. Nothing was left untouched by it. Pasha left because the social change made him feel like he was of secondary importance. I'm not sure I understand this, or at least from the way that Lara explains it to Yury. As I see it, he had an inferiority complex, despite his intellect and education. Pasha seems unable to reconcile such sweeping social change with what he believes to be fundamental human nature. We know that he felt insecure in his marriage. Pasternak explained that when Pasha left for the front after hearing the troop train passing by Yuryatin. But defending one's homeland is one thing. Bowing to an ideology is quite another. As the summer passes, Yury gradually recovers. He's now working as a doctor and gives general pathology lectures at the Rosa Luxemburg Institute. Yury and Lara live together with Katya while Yury continues to feel split. Quote, the division in him was a sorrow and a torment, and he became accustomed to it only as one gets used to an unhealed and frequently reopened wound. It doesn't sound idyllic, and according to Anna Pasternak, it reflects Pasternak's own inner turmoil as he lived a double life between his wife and Olga Ivinskaya. Increasingly, Yury feels that he'll have to quit his job. While they may say, get on with your work and your ideas, what they really mean is make sure your ideas are aligned with the ideology. Yury can't play that game. He asks Lara whether she's heard of Vaden Yapin, his uncle. People say that Yury has been corrupted by Vaden Yapin's ideas. He also mentions that he's been accused of mimicry or mimesis. It sounds rather like the exhausting effort of suppressing one's genuine thoughts in order to conform. Yury can't help but talk about philosophy in his lectures, and he fears that the authorities might be keeping an eye on him and that he might be arrested. Lara agrees that they should be more careful. She tells Yury that Tverzin and Antipov, her father-in-law, have been transferred to the local revolutionary tribunal. Antipov and Pasha did not see eye to eye politically, and Lara fears for herself and Katya. A house next to the hospital is searched and a cache of weapons is found and an anti-revolutionary plot uncovered. Lara feels that the pressure is building and that she should get away. Lara suggests going to Varikino for the winter. She tells Yury that she's been talking with Sima Tuntseva and asked her to look after Katya if anything were to happen to her. Sima Tuntseva pays Lara a visit. She gives a long lecture about God and man. She likens the revolution to stories from the Old and New Testaments. Moses led the Israelites to safety through the parting of the Red Sea. Quote, Everything is visible, audible, deafening, tremendous. Compare that with the birth of the Emmanuel, something quiet, ordinary, and yet inspiring. Quote, leaders and nations belonged to the past. They were replaced by the doctrine of personality and freedom. She goes on to talk about Christ and Mary Magdalene, an important figure for Pasternak. Two of Yury's poems are about Mary Magdalene. We'll get to them in our final recording at the end. Unable to ignore the conversation next door, Yury tries to sleep while Sima and Lara continue talking. He's taken by how Sima's arguments match those of his uncle Yuryatin. Glasha Tuntseva rings the bell and delivers a letter from Moscow addressed to Yury. She remembered him from when she cut his hair. The letter has taken 5 months to arrive. It's from Tonya. She tells him of their daughter Masha and that she and her family are being deported from Russia along with some other right-wing socialists and former cadet party members. She writes that she loves Yury but knows that he does not love her. It sounds similar to what Pasha said to Lara before he left for the front. She believes they are going to Paris and she hopes that Yury will be able to join them. She believes in her heart that he is still alive. She tells him about her time at Varikino with Lara, how Lara was such a help to her during her confinement. She writes goodbye, finally understanding that they will never see each other again. After finishing the letter, Yury cries out with grief and then collapses into unconsciousness. So there we have it, this week's instalment. It's quite a long one, isn't it? We go into the relationship between Lara and Yury, which is super interesting. And we get insights into their marriages, which is highly reflective of what Boris Pasternak went through. I read all about it in Lara by Anna Pasternak, and it was very, very interesting to read, to see the parallels between Olga and Boris and Lara and Yury. Olga Ivinskaya, Anna Pasternak believes, was responsible for Dr. Zhivago in a lot of ways. You know, she's clearly written into it as a character and inspired him. You know, he loved her. There's no doubt about that. But he also loved his wife in a way, Zinaida, who, believe it or not, was also a love interest while he was married to his first wife. Zinaida was married to an artist friend of Pasternak's, and he coveted her, and he ended up with her, obviously. He married her, and he didn't fall out with his artist friend. Is it Gennady Neuhaus, I think, or something like that? So he was used to infidelity, he was used to following his heart, and when he writes about duty, you know, Lara said in that passage there that were Strelnikov to become Pasha again, she would go back to him. And then she takes it back and she's like, no, I wouldn't. So they're following their hearts and ignoring their heads, and they're ignoring their vows, and they're ignoring duty, which is romantic, I suppose. Depends on your view on that, I guess. And whether, you know, is it weakness to follow one's heart, or is that living? I don't know. You decide what your views are. I know what mine are. I just find it super interesting that this relationship has given rise to such a famous love affair, you know. Reminds me a bit of The Bridges of Madison County, which I've both read and seen. I loved that story when I first read it, but I wasn't married at the time. You know, I was a younger man then, not in a relationship, so you know, views can change. Romanticism versus duty. Duty at what cost? You know, these are questions that Pasternak's considering in this novel, which, you know, makes it interesting. What do you think's going to happen after this? Now that Yury's heard from Tonya, he knows he's got a baby daughter whom he's never seen and possibly never will. We don't know that yet. Certainly that's what Tonya believes in her letter, that they're never going to see each other again. And he cries out with grief and faints at the end. So his feelings are are split. Yeah, we'll put it that way. As indeed are Lara's, and it seems as though they're about to head off to live together in Varikino for the winter. So we shall see. Let me know your views on it down below. I'd be keen to hear what you think. Thanks for reading along with me, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.